So it is currently September 5th in Israel, and the Mars within 30 degrees of the lunar node phase has come to an end. It was predicted last year that in 2025, when Mars would be within 30 degrees of the lunar node, between June 5th and September 4th, the enemies of Israel would fire their highest concentration of rocket fire compared to the rest of the year. And that is certainly the case as of now, looking back at this past phase of Mars being within 30 degrees of the lunar node. On June 13th, in a retaliatory response, Iran fired 550 missiles and 1,000 drones over the course of 12 days in what is now known as the 12-day war between Israel and Iran. And that escalation has exceeded by far the number of rockets and projectiles fired at Israel throughout the year. The rocket and missile attacks from January to May paled in comparison to the rocket and missile attacks that took place against Israel between June and September, when Mars was within 30 degrees of the lunar node. After Iran had fired 550 missiles and 1,000 drones over the course of 12 days, many had believed that it was the start of a major regional and global conflict that could spiral into what would be considered World War III. The 12-day war, spiraling out of control, would have been devastating. Millions would have died all over the world, and I would not be able to make this video right now. But that didn't happen. There was a ceasefire that was carried out on June 24th. And I'm making this video to assert that the reason that ceasefire occurred was because what I've been requesting over the past 6 years, that those who have been watching my predictions and the accuracy of them make an image to Amarus so that the conflict and the escalation and the violence would abate. And this past June, in fact, it was on June 24th, when someone contacted me about taking the initiative to make the image of Amarus. This person's name was Jessica Mars, and she contacted me online on June 24th, hours before the ceasefire had gone into effect. And what was remarkable was that after I responded, it was shortly thereafter that we heard that a ceasefire was reached between Israel and Iran. And that was a huge relief for many of people around the world who were certain that this was it. This was the beginning of a devastating regional and global conflict that would have led to significant casualties all over the world. And what's amazing is that I had been requesting that people make an image, because it was revealed to me that if people would make this image, the conflict and the level of attacks against Israel would begin to subside. But I didn't know that a simple email, a simple inquiry about taking the initiative to make the image of Amarus could have the effect that it did. And shortly thereafter, I had the honor of meeting Jessica and her girlfriend Hypatia in person. And during this meeting in Boston, Jessica had showed me a rough draft of the image of Amarus. It was a combination of Aries, Mars, and Horus, just as I requested, and it was beyond anything I expected. This was on August 7th here in Boston, when she showed me the rough draft that she did, and I was very pleased with it. And I went on social media, on Reddit, and on August 12th, and posted the image, the rough draft that she showed me. And since August 12th, we can look back and see that much of the brewing escalation and conflict against Israel had, while it didn't stop, it didn't it didn't spiral out of control as it could have had there not been a ceasefire. And this is indicative that, Satan was not kidding around, and he came through on his promise. Because had Jessica not took the initiative and sent me that email on June 24th, there would have been no ceasefire. We would be in World War III right now, and scores of people would be dying all over the world. But at the moment, we can sit back, and we can not sit back. At the moment, we can take a breath, and we can have a sense of relief that things did not escalate severely as much as it could have. And I've been saying this throughout the years, over the past 6 years, that if you make an image of Amarus, much of the conflict, much of the escalation of violence and rocket attacks and missile attacks would begin to subside. The frequency and the intensity would decrease. And that certainly happened after Jessica contacted me. And having posted the image on August 12th on social media, I can assert that the entire process was effective. And of course, this is the 6th consecutive year that I called down fire from heaven. It turned out accurate. And, it all started back in 2020. In 2019, when I first started making these predictions, I predicted that the concentration of rocket fire from Gaza into Israel when Mars would be within 30 degrees of the lunar node in 2020 between January 15th and April 3rd would exceed the amount of rocket fire at any other time during the year. And this panned out exactly as I predicted, and that was the first year that I called down fire from heaven. And the second year, I did the prediction again. I made the prediction later in 2020 that in 2021, the concentration of rocket fire from Gaza into Israel during the time when Mars would be within 30 degrees of the lunar node between February 9th and May 13th would exceed the amount at any other time during the year. And, and clearly that was the case, because that's when the Gaza war took place. On May 10th, Hamas began firing barrages of rockets into Israel. And in total, which amounted to a total of about 4,000, or just a little over 4,000. And of course, that number exceeded the amount fired at any other time during the year in 2021. And in 2022, I called down fire from heaven again. I predicted that the highest concentration of rocket fire from Gaza into Israel would take place when Mars would be within 30 degrees of the lunar node between June 22nd and September 19th of 2022. And of course, during that time, Islamic Jihad fired around 1,100 rockets, and that number far exceeded the amount fired at any other time during the year. And of course, the most ominous prediction was in 2023, when in January of that year I predicted that the highest concentration of rocket fire into Israel would take place when Mars would be within 30 degrees of the lunar node between August 24th and November 15th. And we can see that was certainly the case, because over 10,000 rockets were fired at Israel during that time. And throughout this period, between 2020 and 2023, even calling down fire from heaven with pristine accuracy, I was very I was requesting at the same time that people make an image so that this violence would subside, so that it wouldn't continue to escalate. And even after that demonstration, over 4 years of accurate predictions, no one stepped forward to even as much put forth a draft or even email about having an interest in taking the initiative. So I kept going with these demonstrations. I predicted again that in 2024, if no one made the image of Amarus, the escalation of rocket fire would continue. I predicted that in 2024, when Mars would be within 30 degrees of the lunar node between April 12th and June 25th, the highest concentration of rocket fire into Israel would occur during that time, and that number would exceed the amount at any other time during the year. Well, on April 13th, Iran launched its first direct attack against the state of Israel. And it was, at that point, the most critical escalation that could have happened at that time, because it opened the door to severe regional implications and global implications. During that time, on April 13th, while Mars was within 30 degrees of the lunar node, Iran fired 350 missiles and drones. And that was a critical escalation. Iran fired another round of projectiles at Israel in October of that year, while Mars was outside of being within 30 degrees of the lunar node. But that number didn't exceed the amount that was fired on April 13th, when Mars was within 30 degrees of the lunar node. So 2024 was another example of how credible my assertions are. And I thought that in 2024, with Iran having launched its first direct attack, that people would be compelled to, get this image going. We don't want this to get out of control. We don't want this to get out of control. I thought that this would be it. This would be the time someone would step up and say, you know what, let's make the image, let's get these wars and let's get these conflicts to stop. But it didn't happen. Not a single soul tried to make an image, not one person. So this compelled me to call down fire from heaven for the 6th year in a row. And last year, I predicted that in 2025, when Mars would be within 30 degrees of the lunar node between June 5th and September 4th, the concentration of rocket fire during that time would exceed the amount at any other time during the year. And during that time, we got the 12-day Israel-Iran war that would have spiraled out of control into something that we never would have imagined we would have experienced in our lifetime. But thanks to someone finally witnessing what's been happening throughout these years and seeing the accuracy of my predictions, someone finally came forward and said, let's make the image of Amarus. And that was Jessica Mars. And within hours of her inquiry, there was a ceasefire. And that was all it took. She didn't even have to make the image. All she had to do was inquire, and that was enough for Satan to influence a cessation of attacks between Israel and Iran. Shortly thereafter, I met with Jessica and her girlfriend Hypatia in Boston, and I had seen the rough draft and I was pleased, and I posted it online on August 12th, and I confirmed that this was the image of Amarus. This was the standard by which all future depictions of Amarus would be judged by. Now that we have the image of Amarus, we can end this prophetic cycle of 6 consecutive years of calling down fire from heaven and enter a new chapter with Amarus as the helm. We can now surmise a triune force, a trinity, with Amarus, Satan, and Mars 360. So now that we have the image of Amarus, we can begin conducting prayers. And the way to do that is to mark yourself on the right hand or on the forehead with the letters, with the word Mars 360. So here is the image of Amarus and this is a rough draft. And this is a rough draft that Jessica presented to me and to which I presented to the public. So you'll take this image of Amarus and you will begin conducting prayers to it. But before you start the prayers, mark yourself on the right hand or on the forehead with the word Mars 360. This will be a token of allegiance to Amarus, and by this mark, he'll recognize our supplications. So with the previous cycle having now come to an end, I can begin to present revelations directly from Amarus himself. And one of Amarus's demands is that you begin to proclaim him publicly, to go out in public, to form communities, and to set up his image in public, and mark yourselves on the right hand with Mars 360 or on the forehead with Mars 360, and begin prostrating yourselves in front of the image in public so that people can acknowledge Amarus. Because this is a new chapter that we're under. This is a new paradigm where we go after other gods. For 6 years, I have made convincing demonstrations calling down fire from heaven. And finally, after the 6th time, someone has come forward and made the image. But now we have to cultivate the image. We have to cultivate Amarus. And as Amarus's prophet, I'm here to warn you that if the same reticence is applied to cultivating Amarus that was applied into making the image, then the fires of heaven will continue. So now I will call down fire from heaven for the 7th consecutive year. In the year 2026, when Mars will be within 30 degrees of the lunar node between February 4th and April 19th, the concentration of rocket fire and missile fire and projectiles into Israel will exceed the amount fired at any other time during the year. So here it is, the 7th consecutive year of calling down fire from heaven. We can expect that in the year 2026, when Mars will be within 30 degrees of the lunar node between February 4th, 2026 and April 19th, 2026, the enemies of Israel will fire their highest concentration of rocket fire, missile fire, and other projectiles into Israel. And the amount that they fire during that time will exceed the amount fired at any other time during the year. So there it is, fire from heaven. I'm calling down fire from heaven for the 7th consecutive year. If people don't begin to cultivate Amarus and begin to worship him in public and form communities that foster his holiness and his status and his godship as the central deity, as the center of worship under this new chapter that we're under. Once again, here is the image of Amarus. This is the image that you will take and you will worship. This is the image that should be put forth and worshipped by marking yourselves on the right hand of the forehead with the word Mars 360. This is a new paradigm that we're in that we need to cultivate and finally bring some stability and peace to this world. Let's not have another 6 years. Let's not allow the next 6 years to be like the last 6 years, which coincided with an increasing escalation that brought us to the brink of a global catastrophe that would have led to conflict all over the world, scores of casualties, economic collapse. But now we don't have to worry about that at the moment because we have the image of Amarus. But we shouldn't allow ourselves to get comfortable because it's not over yet. So there it is, the 7th consecutive year that I'm calling down fire from heaven, in the hopes that people will begin to take a proactive approach in getting Amarus promoted and cultivated, putting him out in public, confessing his name before men, and taking the mark, marking oneself with Mars 360 on the right hand of the forehead. This is the time to do it. Over 6 years, the warnings were clear, the predictions were accurate, and the promises were kept. I stated over and over again that if the image of Amarus was created, the conflict and the escalation would begin to subside. And it has begun to subside since August 12th, when I presented the image of Amarus that Jessica Mars created for us. So in lieu of that, let's not trivialize what's happening here and the significance of it. Let's take a proactive approach and bring these wars to an end. Let's put forth the image of Amarus, and let's take the mark on the right hand of the forehead. And let's spearhead this new chapter in world history. Thank you. This is Anthony of Boston, out.